What if the story you were told was never the real one? What if the divorce that everyone shrugged off as a footnote was actually an emergency exit? And what if the man Meghan Markle left behind wasn't just an ex-husband, but a liability? Because according to whispers, interpretations, and the quiet hints of someone who almost never speaks publicly, this wasn't a love story that ended. It was a risk that had to be eliminated. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And the reason may have nothing to do with romance, and everything to do with what Trevor Engelson knew. Let's start with the question nobody ever asks out loud. Why did Meghan Markle leave Trevor Engelson the way she did? Not slowly, not emotionally, not with visible grief or public nostalgia, but abruptly, coldly, surgically. A ring mailed back, a life erased, a man cut out as if he never existed. People said it was ambition. People said it was distance. People said Hollywood marriages don't last. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Hollywood marriages usually unravel loudly. This one vanished quietly. And silence, when it's that precise, is rarely accidental. Now ask yourself something honestly. If you were about to reinvent your entire identity, if you were about to step into a world where every detail of your past would be audited, frozen, and judged, who would scare you the most? Your enemies? Or the person who knew you before the image was perfected? Because Trevor Engelson didn't just know Meghan Markle the actress. He knew the auditions she didn't get, the meetings that went nowhere, the favors that were asked, the moments of doubt, the versions of herself that never made it into interviews. He knew the early Hollywood Meghan, the one no one sees anymore. And that alone makes him dangerous, not because he ever threatened anything, but because knowledge itself is power, especially when your future depends on appearing flawless. Now let's talk about Doria Ragland, because this story doesn't move forward without her. Doria is not loud. She is not impulsive. She does not overshare. In fact, her public silence has become part of her mystique. And that's exactly why people pay attention when she lets something slip. A phrase here, a pause there, a look that lingers a second too long. When Doria speaks, it's measured. When she hints, it's deliberate. And according to multiple interpretations and observers, Doria has suggested something unsettling over the years, not in direct accusations, not in explosive statements, but in subtle framing. That Meghan wasn't just moving on. She was protecting something. And when a mother protects, it's usually not reputation. It's survival. Now pause for a moment and think. If your daughter believed someone had the power to unravel everything she was building, would you advise patience? Or would you advise distance? Because distance can be framed as growth. But distance is also how you neutralize risk. Here's where the story starts to feel uncomfortable. The divorce timing, the emotional detachment, the lack of public reflection. No messy interviews, no dramatic statements, no nostalgia, just a clean break. Almost like a legal maneuver rather than a heartbreak. And that's not how most people leave marriages they once believed in. But it is how people leave situations that threaten their future. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, let's be clear. This story is not about proving wrongdoing. It's about understanding motive. Because motive doesn't require guilt. It requires fear. And fear has a very specific energy. Fear doesn't argue. Fear exits. Fear deletes. Fear distances itself from anything that can't be controlled. And Trevor Engelson was one thing Meghan could never fully control. Not because he was malicious, but because he remembered her when she wasn't curated. And memory is dangerous in a world built on reinvention. Here's another detail people gloss over. Trevor didn't just date Meghan. He built a life with her during the years no one cared who she was. When there were no palace gates, no royal protocols, no global press. Just auditions, hustle, rejection, and strategy. He was there for the conversations that never make it into biographies, the doubts, the compromises, the raw ambitions spoken out loud without filters. And ambition sounds very different in private than it does in public. Now imagine this. You're about to enter the most scrutinized institution on earth. An institution that doesn't just judge your actions, it judges your past. Every photo, every relationship, every whisper. What do you do with the person who knows the parts of your story that don't fit the fairy tale? You can't rewrite their memory. You can only remove access. And that's what makes this story chilling. Because Trevor didn't need to speak to be dangerous. He simply needed to exist. Now let's talk about the phrase that keeps circulating quietly. He knew too much. Not secrets in the criminal sense. Not scandals in the tabloid sense. But context. Human context. The kind that collapses a carefully constructed narrative. And narratives are everything when you're building a brand disguised as a life. So when people say Meghan outgrew Trevor, ask yourself this. Do people outgrow love overnight? Or do they outgrow risk? Because growth usually includes transition. This included erasure. And erasure is intentional. Now think about Doria again. A woman who has navigated systems quietly her entire life. A woman who understands optics, power, silence. If she believed her daughter's future depended on control, would she say so publicly? Of course not. She would hint. She would protect. She would do exactly what we've seen. Speak just enough to suggest something deeper without ever naming it. And that's what makes her role so important. Because mothers don't exaggerate threats. They minimize them publicly, while responding decisively privately. And that brings us to the part of this story most people avoid. The idea that Meghan's divorce from Trevor wasn't the end of a relationship. It was the beginning of a strategy. A firewall between her past and her future. A clean line separating who she was from who she was about to become. And Trevor stood on the wrong side of that line. Now ask yourself one final question before we move forward. If someone never speaks, never sells a story, never defends themselves publicly, is that restraint? Or is it leverage? Because silence can mean peace. But silence can also mean mutual understanding. And sometimes, silence is the price paid to keep certain doors closed. So here we are. A quiet divorce. A man erased. A mother hinting. A future carefully protected. And the question that refuses to go away. Was Meghan Markle running towards something? Or running away from someone who knew her too well? Because if Doria's hints are pointing where many believe they are, what if the first marriage of Meghan Markle wasn't what the world assumed it was? Most people scroll past it. A small headline in a tabloid. A name that barely registers, Trevor Engelson. But that story, overlooked and dismissed, may hold the key to understanding everything that came after. Because before the palace, before the global scrutiny, before cameras followed her every step, there was Trevor, and there was a version of Meghan nobody remembers. They met in Hollywood. Not in a grand romantic gesture, not in a scene lifted from a movie. They met in the trenches, in the grind of early career ambition. She was ambitious, navigating auditions, late-night calls, scripts scattered across her apartment. He was pragmatic, working behind the scenes, understanding the pulse of what it took to survive in the industry. Their connection was grounded in proximity, trust, and shared struggle. And when you trust someone to witness your private life, the unfiltered you give them power. This was the kind of marriage that outsiders misunderstand. People think they married for love, and that love should naturally last. But love in Hollywood is complicated. It is performance. It is ambition dressed as emotion. It is fragile because the stakes are always higher than they appear. And in that fragile space, every conversation carries weight. Every story remembered is a piece of leverage, whether anyone realizes it or not. Trevor wasn't just an observer. He was a participant. He saw Meghan through auditions that didn't go well. He watched her agonize over rejections that could have destroyed lesser spirits. He knew the dinners, the coffee meetings, the networking events, all the moments nobody will ever write about. And the more he knew, the more dangerous he became, not by choice, but by virtue of being a witness. Now think about that. How do you rebuild yourself when someone still carries the original files? Every mistake, every awkward encounter, every compromise made when survival demanded it. It's not just knowledge. It's memory, context, history, the kind that cannot be fully erased, no matter how much you try. And memory, in this world, is power. But at the time, nobody framed it like that. To everyone else, Meghan and Trevor were just another Hollywood couple. Smiles in public, joint appearances, friends posting pictures. A marriage that seemed ordinary, maybe even enviable. But underneath, the dynamics were far more complicated. Because there are marriages in which both people love each other, and marriages in which one partner knows too much. Ask yourself, when does love become liability? Early Hollywood Meghan was bold, charismatic, funny, ambitious. She had charm, but she also had secrets. Not criminal secrets, not scandals to make headlines, but private truths. conversations with friends that were too candid, stories that exposed vulnerability, weaknesses that, if exposed, could make someone seem less in control than the image demanded. And Trevor remembered. He remembered when she cried over an audition that went wrong. He remembered the scripts she was excited about but couldn't get. He remembered the conversations she later regretted. And more importantly, he had access to all of it, at a time when she wasn't yet ready to be fully guarded. Now imagine being on the verge of a complete reinvention. Your identity is about to expand in ways no one could predict. Every choice you make from this point onward will be scrutinized. Every misstep will be cataloged. Every relationship you've had will be analyzed for motive, character, loyalty, ambition. And one person knows the version of you before it all began. How would that make you feel? Fearful? Calculating? Determined? Likely all three. And that's the hidden context behind the quiet divorce. Because most divorces end with noise. Arguments, legal battles, media leaks, emotional outpouring. But this one ended quietly, almost surgically. One day, they were a couple navigating early Hollywood challenges. The next, they were over. The story barely made a blip. A ring returned. A house empty. No public drama. No messy reflection. Just a clean break. And yet, the intensity of the quiet suggests something deliberate. Because while Trevor may have been oblivious to the implications at the time, the fact that he had known the unfiltered Meghan created a vulnerability. Someone who holds your past can hold your future hostage, not intentionally, but simply by existing. Knowledge, after all, doesn't require action to be dangerous. And that's why Doria Ragland's involvement is quietly critical. Mothers rarely speak out of turn, and when they hint, it is deliberate. Doria's public mentions of concern, her measured commentary, even her silence, point to an undercurrent of protective strategy. Meghan wasn't just leaving Trevor. She was creating space between her past and the version of herself she wanted the world to see. Think about the psychology of it. When a partner knows your private history, the raw, messy, unpolished truths, and your trajectory is about to shift dramatically, what is the safest route? Continue the relationship and hope for discretion? Or exit, establish distance, and reclaim control? Meghan chose the latter. And this is where the narrative most people miss. It's not about Trevor as a villain. He may have been completely benign. He may have loved her sincerely. But love, in this context, isn't enough. Because love does not erase the past. It does not sanitize the memories shared in private. And in Meghan's case, the stakes were too high to rely on love as protection. This is the uncomfortable truth about Hollywood marriages. The real danger is not infidelity, betrayal, or scandal. It is memory. It is access. It is the one person who has seen you at your most vulnerable, your most ambitious, your most uncurated. That person can destroy narratives without a single word, simply by choosing when or whether to speak. And that is exactly what made Trevor dangerous. Now, as the world moves forward, most people will continue to see Meghan's life as a linear progression. Hollywood actress becomes global star, marries a prince, steps back from royal duties. A neat timeline, clean lines, perfect narrative. But the truth, as always, is layered, messy, and invisible unless you look carefully. Trevor Engelson is a footnote in most histories, but in reality, he was part of the foundation. And some foundations are better left hidden, unseen, unmentioned. Because if someone remembers the way things were before the image was perfected, you can never fully control the story that follows. And that is why this first marriage, so easily forgotten, matters more than most people realize. Because it was a test of control, of risk management, of survival. And Meghan passed it quietly, decisively, and at a cost that no one outside her inner circle could comprehend. But there's one last point to consider. Every exit leaves traces. Every cut leaves a scar. Every person removed from a narrative leaves a ripple. And in Meghan's case, that ripple wasn't about anger or heartbreak. It was about securing the story she was about to live. Every rising star has someone who remembers the auditions they didn't get. Someone who remembers the scripts they loved, the people they trusted, the moments they later regretted sharing. For Meghan Markle, that person was Trevor Engelson. Not her enemy, not a villain, not even a betrayer. Just a man who existed in the same orbit at a time when nothing about her life was public, polished, or protected. And that is what made him dangerous. Because knowing someone isn't neutral. It is leverage. Context is leverage. History is leverage. And Trevor had all three. Let's rewind a bit. During those early years in Hollywood, Meghan was navigating a world built on rejection and guarded ambition. Actors wait tables, memorize lines, attend countless auditions, and smile for casting directors who will never remember their name. Everyone is pretending to be confident. Everyone is pretending to have it together. And the truth, the messy, human truth, is kept behind closed doors. Trevor was there for it all. He saw her cry when she didn't book a role she thought she was perfect for. He sat through conversations about who was in and who was out in Hollywood circles. He knew the people she trusted and the people she feared. He witnessed her ambition when it was raw, unrefined, and sometimes reckless.